On the day demonetization was announced, the primary purpose stated was to extinguish black money or unaccounted wealth in the system. Over the next few days, the aim of demonetization was expanded to include pushing India towards a more formal economy. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the cash ban, digital payments shot up. As cash returned to the system, the number of payments being made digitally or apart from cash did drop, but then went on to stabilize. But should the number of UPI transactions and debit card payments be the prime indicator of what impact demonetization has had when we're talking about it a year later? In a nation where 90% of employment and over 50% of GDP is from the informal sector, as per a recent DBS report, the key question should be, a year later, how much has changed? So to talk about how formal India has become 1 year later, we're speaking this evening to Abhijit Sen. He's former member of the Planning Commission and currently with the JNU. Vineet Singh is joining us. He's Chief Business Officer of Mobile Wallet MobiKwik. Thank you so much for speaking with us on Bloomberg Quint and on the demonetization debates this evening. Abhijit Sen, I'll start with you. If we had to look at what demonetization has done to the informal economy, and I want to first focus on agriculture, because we've seen a spate of farmer agitations and then farm loan waivers roll out. Do you connect that to demonetization?
Yes, I mean, in a limited sense. I mean, the problem is that we've got very few hard figures regarding the informal sector as yet. But agriculture is one of those sectors in which we do have some hard figures. We had two bad drought years, 14-15 and 15-16. We had a very good year last year, and we've got a decent year this year. I would have expected the output this year to be substantially high, about 4% or so growth rate. In fact, we're getting reports of Kharif being negative. Now, it's difficult to say it's entirely due to demonetization, but it does raise the possibility that something unusual like this, that is, you don't get a full rebound, is unconnected to this phenomenon of either demonetization or GST or whatever is going on, the so-called formalization of the economy, which the other side of the coin is that we are deformalizing the informal sector.
No, so now let's talk about deformalizing the informal sector. And if you had to look at demonetization with the state... Yeah, no, just to take off on that point, if you had to look at...
Let me tell you what it is.
Yeah. Sure, go ahead. Sure, go ahead and then I'll put my question
Sorry, you're
across.
talking to me still or someone else?
Yes, I'm still talking to you, Mr. Sen. Finish your point and then I'll put my question across.
Yeah, the point is this. Yeah, which is that the economy in the informal sector not only does not depend on contracts, it depends on cash, it doesn't depend... It's a system, for good or for bad, depends on trust. Now, if you've got a system in which a lot of certainties are breaking down suddenly, one after the other, then trust also breaks down. And under those circumstances, a lot of things can go wrong. And it's a question then of not what's happening in the informal sector, rather than are we being able to get the informal into the formal. And I think that's where a lot of the issues are missing in what I hear in terms of debates. It's a very fundamental thing. Just like money is fundamental to the economy, trust is fundamental to the organization in which economies function. And this trust is very different from contracts signed on paper.
Okay. I also want to introduce Mr. Anil Khaitan. He's Of course, from the PhD Chamber of Commerce, the president of PhD CCI, who's joining us in on the conversation. And, Abhijit Sen has been talking about how much the informal economy has been managed to be formalized in the last 1 year. What is your sense, Mr. Khaitan? Because when we talk about smaller businesses, when we talk about trade and jobs outside the purview of the formal economy, is there a sense we're getting now, a year later, about where all of this has landed up? Has the process towards getting into the formal economy been hastened?
Well, to an extent, yes, because when demonetization happened, the informal economy was greatly affected because they all deal in cash. So naturally, they had 500 and 1,000 rupees notes, which constituted 86% of the money supply. So that being sucked out of the system, the small and the informal sector got grossly affected. Their cash flows got affected. You take the shoe industry in Agra. The informal sector was employing almost 4 lakh people. After demonetization, the employment came down to 1 lakh people because they didn't have the cash to buy raw material, to manufacture, to pay wages, so on and so forth. But now, anything drastic or anything disruptive in terms of reforms, initial negative effects are there, but then we must accept it. It's already there, and we have to see how the country progresses. One thing is good, that the economy has been remonetized, and now the only biggest question and concern to all of us is when will the private investment cycle start, because that has still not started. And so I think it's a major issue for the business community. And we understand because of the banks and the NPAs and so on and so forth.
Sure.
Coming back to the demonetization for the informal sector.
Yeah,
I think slowly and steadily we are going to get there.
Okay, and because you spoke about private investment, that is one part of it. Effectively, what we're trying to understand, and let's really simplify this for everyone who's tuning in and watching, remember you can send in your comments and questions as well, is that have people's habits changed forever? And is the large number of people who before 8th November 2016 not using anything but cash, have their habits changed effectively? And here's where Vineet should come in, because Vineet, of course, it was a good time for payment wallets like yours. It was a good time for digital payments. We did see a drop after the cash came back into the system. After that, there has been some stability. But has that change percolated to the lowest levels? Has it percolated enough into the informal economy?
So look, hi. Yes, the change has percolated to a lot of the strata of formal and informal economy. I would not make a sweeping statement that the change has reached 80%, 90%, 100% of the population of India. That is not possible. We are a very, very large and complex kind of a country, and there are lots of issues. Internet bandwidth is not available throughout the country. Now the government of India has set up a significant agenda towards linking that problem as well. But if you look at the numbers, I think the numbers speak for themselves. If you look at the numbers, that tells you that, yes, we are moving in a secular kind of a street, in a secular direction towards a cashless digital payments kind of an ecosystem. So if I give you some numbers like FY 15-16, the digital transactions from PPIs were around 48,800 crores. It increased to 83,800 crores in the financial year 16-17. That closed in March 2017. So in terms of number of users, around 150 million new users were added by mobile wallets. From less than, you can say, 2 million transactions a day, the transactions increased to around 10 million transactions a day. So whichever way you slice and dice the data, I think the numbers are humongous. The traction has been huge. The number of people, first-time users who have flavored digital payments, okay, has been a humongous kind of a number. It has, I think, added companies like us 5-6 years impetus through one act of or through one event of demonetization. So yes, I think the numbers speak for themselves, and it has been a very, very positive move. And now everybody across the world in the payments ecosystem is looking at India, and the Indian payments business, or the, you can say, digital transaction economy, is a huge opportunity, and a significant amount of investment is also being made in this sector.
That's fantastic. It's really good for companies like yourselves. But has the amount of cash that people used actually not gone back to previous levels? Because there is anecdotal evidence that where people have had the opportunity, they've gone back to cash. And you know, perhaps in a slightly different context, but like Abhijit Sen was saying, it's a matter of trust, and perhaps, Mr. Sen, it's also a matter of habit. When people have now had access to cash once again, has it been a greater comfort to move back to cash?
So look, certain population number, certain amount of population has moved back to cash. Okay. Yeah, Abhijit, please.
Let's face it, cash costs nothing. Cash costs nothing. Any other system costs something to the person who's handling it. And I think what we are seeing is certainly a great opportunity for the non-cash system, especially for MobiKwik and others. And yes, I mean, I think the world is looking at India as a model to make investments in that sector. But the numbers, 10 million or 150 million, should be looked at the population, which is 1,300 million. Okay? And you've got to also realize that over this period, what has happened, our cash to GDP ratio has gone from a little over 12% to a little under 11%. Now, that's no big deal. I mean, that's the sort of thing we've seen fluctuations in the past. So I think we are stabilizing at a level possibly somewhat lower than earlier, but not weirdly lower than earlier. I think, you know, I think there has to be a balance about a country which has the population that we do. In this population, a growth from 1% to 10% is a huge increase in business for people, but for the 90% left out of it, it's still they're left out of it. So I think, you know, yes, I mean, it can be a huge opportunity, and it can be nothing, depending where you're coming from.
You know, I just a quick...
And at the end of the day, I think we've got to accept, or at least work out, whether an economy where at least 30% of the non-agricultural incomes were coming from the informal sector, have we done enough to either get that informal sector into the formal sector, which we haven't, or to at least substitute for it in terms of growth multiplying features? As far as the investment figures show, we haven't yet done it. And I don't see it happening. Although there will be associated with this a lot of opportunities, because some sections, what the informal was doing, are now available for the formal to do with less barriers, simply because the competitiveness of the informal sector has gone down.
You know, that's an important point which has
But that's not good for the people working in the informal sector.
Absolutely. And, you know, as Anil Khaitan was explaining, he was giving us the example of the shoe, factories in Agra and what has happened there. If one were to put the question this way, Mr. Khaitan...
It's our entire export business.
Exactly. Mr. Khaitan, if you were to put this way, that a year later, how much of that informal sector has survived? Because those who couldn't move on by anecdotal, evidence have been left on the wayside. So, in your view, what is the current picture? Have enough people or enough small businesses managed to jump on to the bandwagon, of digital payments and a more formal economy?
Well, I wouldn't say completely, because we must admit that the digital literacy rate in our average common man is lacking, and that is a major factor. Also, we have to consider that they have to be digital literate to do digital transactions. So it is not completely, basically, gone on electronic mode, and it's not possible also, because you cannot have an absolute cashless economy. Even if you see the United States, their cashless, I think, percentage is about 55 or 50%. So, and it's very difficult, the question you asked, as to what has been the total impact, because at least I don't have any data and statistics on this. So I wouldn't be able to make a specific
absolutely. In fact, this is a tricky one. This is a tricky one because there is no real clear data for the informal economy. It's a lot of guesstimating and trying to understand what is happening in that space of the economy. But Vineet, you wanted to come in on the point of how much literacy is there for that massive move to digital payments, and of course the key question that did you need demonetization for that?
So look, first I'd like to counter a point raised by Mr. Sen, that there is no cost to cash. In fact, there is a humongous amount of cost to cash. That if you look at petrol pumps, if you look at small businesses, the highest amount of theft, pilferage happens because of cash. They keep expensive safes, they keep armed guards. The cash van comes at least a couple of times in the day, or once a day, or something like that. 90% of petty crimes in India are related to cash anyways. So there is a humongous cost to cash. Now coming to the second point, that about the informal sector. So yes, the informal sector at an education level has all the tools of accessibility that are available to anybody and everybody. Now, the challenge with the informal sector is that, and they have been affected a little bit negatively here, because they used to operate a significant portion of their business in the parallel economy, which does not pay taxes. So that is why when demonetization happened, because they used to deal with cash, their businesses got affected because they didn't have enough money in the bank. So I think, apart from demonetization, cashless transactions, there are other bigger issues of national security as well. So if you ask me personally, cash is directly proportional to money laundering, and money laundering is directly proportional to terrorism. So if we don't, stop.
Vineet, are you saying that every tea vendor and, samosa vada seller is money laundering? I mean, I understand the point you're making, but cash, does cash equal, money laundering? Because that's what you're saying. Everyone who was using cash
not saying that.
Before 8th November was not necessarily, indulging in criminal activities.
So look, tea vendors don't constitute 80% of the informal economy, do they? Okay, so let's not talk about exceptions here. I'm talking about the humongous amount of small and medium businesses which operate in India, okay, and which operate in the parallel economy. Now, the poor tea vendor or smaller businessman which operate a small stall or a thela or a shop for their daily living, yes, they have got affected in one way or the other. But we are a very jugadu kind of a country and jugadu kind of people. So the point is that tea vendors' business has not gone down. Panwala's business has not gone down because they were amongst the first adopters of mobile wallets.
Okay.
So you go to any pan stall even now.
I quickly want to get Abhijit Sen and of course Mr. Khaitan's views on the comments you have made. I'll start with Abhijit Sen. The key point Vineet is making is that people had to move with the times, and a lot of people try to not declare the money they were making by existing in the parallel economy.
No, I think it's important to note two things. There is a part of the so-called informal economy which essentially is thriving because they don't pay taxes. And there is a very large part of the informal economy which doesn't have to pay any taxes because they're so bloody low productivity and their incomes are so low. Now, let's get the numbers straight. Leave out agriculture. There are roughly 100 million enterprises in the informal sector, according to the economic census. 60 million of them are one-worker enterprises. And the remaining 40 million have 3 workers in them. Yes, there will be about 1 million or so enterprises which are living off, basically robbing the government, not paying taxes. But the bulk of the enterprises, the basic income is what? It's about 6,000 to 10,000 rupees a month. On that sort of incomes, you don't pay taxes. So the question of avoiding taxes doesn't arise. So I think we should get these things. And when you're talking about the informal, we could have, and when you look at our exports, leave aside petroleum products, leave aside pharmaceuticals, and leave aside motor cars, it's almost all coming from that informal sector. And I think we've got into a situation where we are, I think, confusing too many things at the same time. And just because this matter has become a debate, you've got to be this side of the demonetization or that side, we are, I think, forgetting the big picture, which is how are we going to get out into a situation where our investment rate from about 38% is now down to less than 28%. We've got to actually do something about it. And I think that's where what I said originally, which is trust in the economy, matters. And I think no amount of shouting this way or that way is going to bring about trust. We've got to do something clearly about it. And that isn't that, if you wait, things will get better, or that things are already getting better because, the only people who've been hurt are the guys who don't pay taxes.
Okay. Mr. Khaitan, just your comments on that point, or the key point that Vineet was making, that what demonetization has also done a year later for some businesses has forced the light to be shone upon them. Is that the case?
Can you repeat your question, please?
The point that was being made earlier, that since demonetization, a lot of small businesses which were not possibly revealing the extent of business they were doing, trying to avoid taxes, have not been able to do that. And that is also one positive we should see in the whole debate. That's the point Vineet was making earlier. I want your response to it.
Yes, I agree with Vineet. I think he is absolutely correct, because now to do business in India, ultimately in the long run, or maybe 2 years down the road, you have to merge with the formal economy. And as Mr. Sen said, that's also correct, that the informal sector will become less competitive now, because, some might come under GST, and, basically the entire transparency will increase their cost. And the competition to the larger sector will definitely reduce. So I think overall, and if the tax base, which the government says has increased by 69 lakhs, so I think that's a good positive if government can collect more taxes, but that only time will show, because we have to let 31st March 2018 come and then see if absolute tax collection has gone up and whether it's due to the increase of the tax base or not. So I think overall I agree with Vineet, and I think Vineet is right.
Okay, so if in conclusion we had to come to the key question we asked at the beginning of the debate, and I'm going to ask Mr. Sen to end with that point. What has happened to the informal economy? The sense I'm getting from this conversation is that those who couldn't adapt have been left by the wayside, and perhaps that's the way the road will move ahead. Is that a fair assessment, Mr. Sen?
see, I think the informal economy has no option but to adapt. That's all that it does. The question is, where does it adapt to? And as far as I think the talk on the tax side goes, I think that is the single promise of a demonetization in the bigger picture of things. At the moment, that's the only promise. But if you look at the 6-month figure on income taxes, the rate of growth this year has been, that is April to September, the rate of growth of income tax collections has been slightly less. It's about 16% compared to 18% in the same period last year. Now, I hope it goes up. There is a lot of promise from the, filing data, but the actual numbers in terms of taxes collected is not bearing that up. So I think, one has to ask that if the economy itself has been affected, then even if the share of taxpayers in that economy goes up, the taxes might not actually go up that much.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And that is really what we don't know what's exactly happened to the we don't exactly know what's happened to the informal economy.
No, absolutely.
But this is another piece of data. That is the tax collections in the first 6 months.
All right. So a lot of that data still has to come in a year later. A lot of those pieces of the puzzle are coming together. But we have some comments coming in from our viewers as well. In fact, one of our viewers asks the question that what was the prime reason for demonetization? Was it to increase the tax base? Was it, to extinguish black money, to bring us into the formal sector? We're still asking those questions a year later. Has the informal sector adapted, survived, strengthened? What has happened is something that is difficult to pinpoint at this point. What no one disagrees on is that the formal sector has been impacted hugely by demonetization. What the end result will be for the informal sector, of course, remains to be seen. Thank you so much for joining us on the debate this evening. Are we live?